Welcome everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay. All right. If you hear, I need to warn you, I do this in all my presentations. If you hear a low muffle in the back, it has nothing to do with your internet. My dog sleeps by my feet and she snores quite loudly. I try to keep her out of the room, but then she barks and wants in. It's a whole thing. I just want you to know that if you hear her or if you hear that at any point, it's her, not you. So that being said, that's an icebreaker. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ralph Kellogg. I am on the board of NAM, and I also work in my day job at Lutheran Family Services as the Assistant Vice President of Human Resources. And prior to working at LFS, I was at Nebraska Appleseed for a year as their Director of HR. And then prior to that, it feels like a lifetime ago, I spent 10 years at Centris Federal Credit Union as their Vice President of Human Resources and Training. I do quite a few of these throughout the year, or a couple of these throughout the year for NAM and for HARAM. I also work with HARAM on the study sessions for folks who are looking to take the PHR or the SPHR exam, and then work with UNO on their SHRM prep courses. And then because I cannot love HR any more than I do, I also teach at UNO undergrad and grad courses in HR. So very, very immersed in the HR field. I just love it, love it, love it. So welcome to all of you. Do you all want to go around and just do some quick introductions, name and what business you're from? Lynn, can we start with you?
Sure. Lynn Owen, I'm the Senior Business Partner at Sequence Health Group.
Great, welcome. All right, and I'm just going to go in order of people I see on my screen. Allison?
Hi, I'm Allison. I am a Human Resources Specialist at Nebraska Children's Home Society.
Welcome. All right. Kayla?
Kayla is my coworker, and she had to step out because we had an employee come into our office.
Okay.
But she's also a Senior Business Partner at Sequence Health Group.
Oh, awesome.
The joys of when you're doing things virtually.
Yes, absolutely.
Interrupt. So
absolutely. Well, welcome. Nikki? Nikki, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm Nikki. I am the Executive Coordinator for Spark CDI.
Okay, wonderful. Welcome. And then last but not least, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Curley. I'm the HR manager for Syme Johnson. We're a CPA firm in West Omaha.
Oh yeah, perfect. Wonderful. Yeah, very well known in the nonprofit community. Welcome. Glad to have you join us.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get things kicked off. Sarah, Abby, Rosie, any last words from you before we dive in? All right. Well, I do want to give Sarah a heads up. You will see that the presentation is divided into two sections today. The first part will cover sexual harassment and prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace. The second part will cover workplace bullying, which is on the rise, surprisingly. I found it surprising in the new virtual environment. It's becoming quite a pervasive issue, and we'll get into some of the reasons why that's occurring more frequently. But I did use the templates that Sarah prefers that I use for the workplace bullying session. So you'll see the transition when we go from this very nice sort of professional looking presentation to one that where I've used a T-Rex. So I just throw that out to you. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in here if I can get my technology working. So first and foremost, a few learning objectives for the sexual harassment portion of the training today. We're going to learn, or at least talk about the definition of sexual harassment. I think all of you are probably involved or have been involved in the area of human resources for a long time. So that definition is probably going to be familiar to you. We're going to learn and talk about the different types of sexual harassment. And then lastly, review examples of sexual harassment and hostile work environments within the workplace. This type of training lends itself to me talking a lot because there's a lot of information to share. But I really want to encourage you that if you have questions along the way or comments along the way, to go ahead and drop those in the chat. And I or Abby will get those questions answered as quickly as we can. So don't stand on ceremony. We've got a small group today, so let's dive in and learn from each other. All right. So everybody recognize these guys from the past several years? Everybody know who these folks are? Show of hands. Yes, no?
Some of them.
I'm sorry, Lynn. All right, who are they? Who are these guys? This is forced participation. So someone jump in and tell me who they are.
So we got Harvey Weinstein,
Yep,
Kevin Spacey,
yep,
and Matt Lauer.
yes,
Not sure
yes.
who the second.
I will share who that is. Yes. So Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, Matt Lauer, all sort of infamous faces of the Me Too movement over the last 5 years. Each of these individuals, Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and Matt Lauer. Harvey Weinstein in particular was found guilty of sexual assault and is now serving time in prison, waiting to be tried in California on similar charges. Kevin Spacey, very successful actor at the time of charges were leveled against him. He was playing on a little known show that you may remember called House of Cards. It was one of the highest rated Netflix shows of all time. He was removed from his position or from his starring role in that show due to allegations of him being inappropriate with a minor. And then lastly, Matt Lauer. Matt Lauer, for those of you that watched today, back in the day, see what I did there, was the morning host, was responsible for bringing in $22 million annually in ad revenue. So he was a huge draw for the Today Show. However, he did some inappropriate things with an intern during the Helsinki Olympics in 2014. She subsequently filed a claim against him. And after the claim was filed, it felt as though the floodgates were open for people to begin filing complaints against Matt Lauer for behavior that he had perpetrated on female staff, female coworkers, but in particular interns. And he subsequently was fired from the Today Show. The guy in the middle, the second from the left there, his name is Les Munez. He was the CEO of CBS. He was responsible for morning programming and news programming. His wife, if any of you watch Big Brother, is Julie Chen. And it was found that he was also grossly inappropriate with people within the workplace, interns, and other female staff colleagues. So he was removed from his post. So when you look at these faces and you look at the ramifications of inappropriate violating behavior within the workplace, it is not only just inappropriate comments, but it also can be taken to a level of extremes. And obviously these are extreme cases with the individuals that we're citing. but it does give you an indication of the lack of tolerance and the lack of acceptability and as I said, consequences that people have for poor actions, especially for men who have used their positions of power to exploit men and women with whom they work. All right, so some notable sexual harassment cases that I want to give some context to. 1981, Clarence Thomas, this was the first case that I became aware of on a sort of national scale. He was accused by Anita Hill during his Supreme Court confirmation hearing of being sexually inappropriate and or sexually harassing of Hill when she clerked for him. In 2017, we saw the cases of Harvey Weinstein, Roger Ailes, who has since passed away, who ran Fox News, who had claims from many of the on-air female talent about his actions. Matt Lauer, we talked about. Mario Batali, for any of you who follow the celebrity chef circuit, he was also found to have acted inappropriately with female staff. Charlie Rose, if any of you are familiar with Charlie Rose, he had his own talk show for several years, was also a host on public television. Prior to the shakeup on CBS Morning News, he was also a contributor on that show as well. So he was also found to have acted inappropriately, I believe, if I remember the story correctly, with his female assistant. The big thing to know is that in 2017, which is not that long ago, there were 51 notable men accused of sexual harassment that actually made, the cases actually made their way into the forefront of the news. So you're thinking about that number in and of itself, and I've only really touched on 5 notable cases. There are 46 other men out there who were accused of doing similar things in and around the same time frame, you know, as a result of using their position of power and influence to really exploit people that they were working with. Other cases, a little bit more recent here, 2018, Christine Bosley Ford and Brett Kavanaugh, again, another Supreme Court confirmation. Bosley Ford alleged that Kavanaugh assaulted her at a party during the 1980s when they were both in high school. Kavanaugh was ultimately confirmed to the US Supreme Court despite these charges. 2018, Bill Cosby was found guilty of multiple accusations of sexual assault. He was found to have drugged and sexually assaulted women from 1965 to 2008. In 2018, Cosby was found guilty of sexual assault and sentenced to prison. He has since been released from prison. However, he is now facing a civil suit from the woman that brought the criminal charges against him. Andrea Constant, I believe is her name. So all of these individuals, for better or worse, some have gone on with tainted records. Others, like Cosby, have really lost significant reputation and goodwill among the public because of the accusations and substantiated accusations of their prior bad acts and behavior. So I just want to give some context to this, that this is not just something that occurs in a business or in a manufacturing setting or on a factory floor. This occurs all over in government, in business, and show business, and that no business is immune to this type of behavior. And we're going to talk about how we set that framework up for ensuring that not only are we aware of what the behavior looks like, but how do we help guard against inappropriate behavior from occurring in the workplace. All right. Whoops, sorry about that. Okay, so sexual harassment is defined as conduct that is unwanted. It can be verbal or physical advances, sexually derogatory statements, or discriminatory remarks made by somebody in the workplace which is offensive or objectionable to the recipient, or which causes the recipient discomfort or humiliation. The earlier part of that definition can go into what is referred to as quid pro quo, or this for that, and we'll talk about that. The other part of the definition where we talk about discomfort or humiliation can go into what is referenced as a hostile work environment, and we'll talk about both of those different types. The important part to remember about sexual harassment or harassment of any kind is that it interferes with the recipient's job performance. And we're going to investigate that it can not only be physical manifestations that can occur, it can also be behavioral manifestations or mental health manifestations that can occur as a result of being harassed in the workplace. So the Equal Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, offers the following definition of sexual harassment. Again, it's unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and verbal or physical contact of a sexual nature. And again, the two types of harassment most commonly known to folks within human resources are quid pro quo, which is Latin, and it means this for that. You do this for me, I will do that for you, or hostile work environment. Sexual harassment, important to know, is a form of gender discrimination as it's outlined in the law. The reason that it is a form of gender discrimination is, were it not for the gender of the individual, the harassment would not have occurred. So were it not for a female being a female, the male perpetrator would not have engaged in the harassing behavior. The victim or harasser may be a man or a woman. So it is not uncommon to hear of females harassing male employees and vice versa, as we know. Harassment can be made from a male to a female to a male to a male, or female to a female. It does not matter in the context of who the harasser is. The point is they're harassing the other individual due to the gender or due to the type of person that they're looking to target. The harasser can be a supervisor, a vendor, a supervisor of another area. The harasser can be a coworker or someone not employed by the company. The victim does not have to be the direct target of the harassment. Anyone can be affected by the conduct. So, as an example, and I hope they will allow me some latitude. If I were Rosie's manager as well as Sarah's manager and Aaron's manager, I could be sexually harassing Rosie, but do so in a way that Sarah and Aaron observe or see what I'm doing, and they can be impacted by what I'm doing. Rosie could be like, forget it, it's not that big of a deal, I can handle it. That's not always going to necessarily negate the impact, because other people within the organization can be impacted or feel victimized by the behavior that they're witnessing. The other points here is that the harassment does not have to result in economic injury or termination to the victim. There was some thought several years ago that as long as the harassment was not so bad that it didn't result in the victim quitting their job, most times it was a female victim quitting their job, which resulted in economic injury to that individual, then it was no harm, no foul. I didn't, my behavior wasn't that bad that it resulted in her quitting, so everything was good. Not necessarily the case. The other point here is the conduct of the harasser must be unwelcome. And we're going to talk about what it means to actually address the behavior as being unwelcome within the work environment. Any questions so far? Okay. Let's talk about severe and pervasive. With the definition of sexual harassment, the conduct of the harasser must either be severe or pervasive to be classified as sexual harassment. So my example here is, although a single unwanted request for a date or one sexually suggestive comment might offend you and might be inappropriate, it might not be sexual harassment. However, several relatively minor separate incidents may add up to sexual harassment if the incidents affect your work environment. So again, I'm going to use Rosie. If I walk up to Rosie one day and I say, hey, I really want to take you out and go out on a date, and she says no, and I make some sort of inappropriate remark after that, it might irritate her. It might be offensive to her. She might think, wow, Ralph is really a jerk, and I really want to keep my distance from him. But if she went to Human Resources and said, hey, I want to file a sexual harassment complaint against Ralph, as the HR manager, I might say, let's talk about this and let's break down what occurred here. Asking questions about, is this the first time the behaviors occurred? Were you touched or threatened in any way, to get some more context about the situation? If Rosie ultimately says, no, he asked me out, made some sort of inappropriate comment when I told him I didn't want to go out with him, that might result, or actually in this case, it would result in me bringing, I guess in this case, myself into the office and having a conversation to say, listen, here are the boundaries that we need to set up in the organization. And although your intent may not have been, one to upset or offend, the impact of your actions did, and we need to talk about setting professional boundaries going forward. It probably would not rise to the level where I would actually open a sexual harassment investigation on this particular situation. However, if Rosie told me as the HR manager that this was the 15th time in 2 weeks that I had that someone had made overtures to ask her out, that the remarks were getting a little bit cruder each time, and this last time she was trying to exit from a room, and I blocked her way, or the individual blocked her way, that would definitely be a time that I would open a sexual harassment investigation against the individual, because now you're showing severe and pervasive behavior. The pervasive behavior being you're continuing to do it even after the individual has said no, they don't want to go out with you. And the severe portion of that is you've actually blocked an employee's ability to exit a room where the individual can now feel as though their physical being is threatened. So when people bring sexual harassment issues to me, and I would really encourage all of you to think of this as well. It's really, really important to dig in and think of context and content, not just one specific instance. And it very well may be one instance is enough, but it very well may be that what you're looking at is a single innocent relative to something more severe happening, but it could be a single instance that would really warrant a conversation or a coaching session rather than a full-blown sexual harassment investigation. Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone have a different opinion, those of you who do this every day? No? Okay. All right. It may be sexual harassment if the conduct unreasonably interferes with your work performance or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. For example, it may be sexual harassment if repeated comments make you so uncomfortable at work that your performance suffers, or you decline professional opportunities because it will put you in contact with the harasser. So as an example, I said earlier, I may be making comments to Rosie every day. Rosie may be like, that's just how he is. He's a jerk. I've learned to ignore it. Sarah and Aaron may feel differently and say, his behavior, his conduct, the verbiage that he uses, it's really offensive to me. And I really don't want to be around it. And it's really impacting my ability to do my job and get my work done. That could very well be sexual harassment from the creation of a hostile work environment. So again, just because and I will use the term target of the harassment does not seem to be bothered by it or seems to take it in their stride, does not mean that it won't have ripple effects within the organization, or that harassment complaints cannot be lodged simply because the comments or the behavior isn't being directed at other people. So again, if it's impacting your work, impacting your performance, if you're starting to feel like, gee, he's really a jerk, I don't know if I want to be, at a conference with him, because what if he starts doing that to me? That can have, a lot of merit in terms of a sexual harassment complaint or investigation being lodged within the workplace. So when you look at conduct and sexual harassment, conduct is not sexually harassing if it is welcome. Okay, and what I mean by that is if I am continually making comments toward Rosie every day, and Rosie never says to me, listen, inappropriate, you're out of bounds, don't ever say those things to me again. If you do, I'm going to go to my manager, I'm going to go to human resources. It may be interpreted that she's okay with what I'm saying. That may not be the case, but it may be interpreted that because she never said, stop it, I'm offended, and I'm going to escalate if you don't, quit your behavior. I could infer that she's okay with me making those comments. On the other hand, if she banters back with me and has, makes comments back to me, things along those lines, I could also infer that she's okay with it. It is really, really important. And one thing that I would always encourage you to write into any procedure within your organization, the first rule of thumb, if the individual feels comfortable doing this, is to tell the person who's harassing them, not okay. Don't do it anymore. I don't feel comfortable with you making those kinds of comments. So very important to say that and to establish boundaries. If you don't feel comfortable going to the harasser, or if an employee doesn't feel comfortable saying those things to the harasser, say it's the individual's manager or boss, then you need to look for the human resources department, or you need to look for the executive director. If it's the executive director, what I would then look for are rules of conduct in the handbook, and the way in which you lodge a complaint against an executive director's behavior. Typically, you will have an audit committee or the board that you can go to that will be able to take a claim against the executive director if that's the individual who is actually the perpetrator of the behavior. But I always tell folks the first rule of defense is to let the person know, I don't find your behavior acceptable. Here are my professional boundaries. Do not ever say those things to me again. And if the issue occurs again, at that point you can say, I told you once, you've done it again. I'm now going to take this issue to human resources or to my manager. You don't have to disclose that you're going to do that, but after you've set those boundaries, if the behavior occurs again, you're perfectly within your right, or any employee is perfectly within their right to take those concerns to the appropriate people to help resolve the issue. Any questions on that, or does that deviate from what people know or already do in their workplace? Quiet bunch. Okay, all right. I'll keep going. Jump in if you've got questions. Okay, so let's talk about types of harassment. Let's talk about quid pro quo, or this for that. This typically is a type of harassment that occurs between someone in power and a subordinate. So this occurs when a person in position of authority, it's typically a supervisor or a manager, demands sexual favors as a condition to getting or keeping a job, or to keeping a job or a particular benefit. It can have to do with promotion, a project, work shift, which I'll talk about in just a second, overtime, which I will talk about in just a second. But the point of this type of harassment is that if you do this for me, I'll do that for you. And it's typically what we've seen over the course of time when we talk about sexual harassment in the workplace. You want this promotion, then you have to go out with me. You want this particular project, then you have to go out with me. There's always a contingent for you as the target to getting something. And it's typically to give in to what the perpetrator is asking within this arrangement. One thing I do want to talk about, though, work shift and overtime. When I train this at organizations, people are like, well, why would you care about work shift or overtime? And I will share with you why. A couple of years ago, there was a pretty famous case in the Chicago area dealing with the Ford plant. Have any of you heard about this case? About the Ford case in Chicago? Rosie's shaking her head no. Any of my HR folks ever hear about this? No? All right, I must have been reading the right news source this day. So here's what happened in a nutshell. So Ford plant, it was in an industrial part of town, but it was the biggest employer in the area, and they did manufacturing. So these are one of the jobs that you used to hear about your grandparents talking about, where they could go to work at a particular plant, work their entire careers, have a good middle-class life, and know that they could retire okay. Well, this plant attracted a lot of working moms, and so there was a contingent of female workers there who worked on the day shift, and they were harassed by the shift managers and shift supervisors. In some cases, the women were forced to engage in sexual activities with these individuals, and what was used as leverage over them was the work shift. If you don't do what I want, I'm going to put you on an overnight work shift. And who's going to take care of your kids if that happens? So there was a threat. The other thing that occurred was that if they didn't do what they wanted, they would take the overtime away. And if you have worked in a manufacturing plant, you're talking about probably some substantial money if you're being denied overtime. You're talking about, what am I going to do for childcare if I have to work overnight? Because a lot of these women worked on day shift. Their kids were in school. By the time school got out, they were going home for the day. And many of the women cited, yep, I would be able to see my kid off and be home when they got home from school, or just a little bit later. So the day shift worked out perfectly for them. So again, it doesn't need to be a situation of a white collar perpetrator in an office building or something along those lines. It can be something in a manufacturing plant. The point is that leverage is being used to specifically say, if you don't do this for me, I will, take something from you or deny you something. So again, it's very, very power centric. And if you're in this type of situation, it can feel very overwhelming and very suffocating, to the point where you feel like you're trapped of, I don't know what to do. And many people in situations like this will just leave their job and not say anything, allowing that individual to go on and continue doing this type of thing to other employees. Any comments on the quid pro quo? Anybody ever dealt with the quid pro quo issue in their role as an HR manager? Really? I want to come and work where you are. You guys are doing something right. That's awesome. Okay, quiet group. All right. So hostile work environment. This is an environment where repetitive, unwelcome sexual conduct in the workplace that interferes with an individual's performance or creates an intimidating, hostile, or an offensive environment. So this is what I was talking about earlier. The individual that the harasser is targeting may not be offended, but people around them may be offended. So it's not just how it impacts, again, what I refer to as the target. It also is the way in which the harasser's behavior impacts other people in the environment. The behavior permeates the work environment and prevents the employees from doing his or her work. It can result in an EEO claim of race, color, sex, national origin, religion, age, disability, or sexual orientation. The conduct must be intimidating, offensive, or abusive. The court will review the case and determine how a reasonable person would react to such treatment. So in some situations, hostile work environments can also result because of race. It can also result because of religion, things along those lines. There have been cases where hostile work environments or hostile work environment grievances have been filed with the EEO because people of color were targeted in the workplace. There were instances a few years ago in a workplace. I can't remember what manufacturer it was, but there were African-American men there who had nooses that were fashioned in and around their work environment, which prompted a complaint with the EEO, for obvious reasons. So it doesn't just necessarily have to be a sexual harassment claim for a hostile work environment to result. So again, if you've got individuals in your organization who think something is funny or who are practical jokers or who don't understand why people can't lighten up, you may not be working with somebody who understands that people are coming to the work environment with different worldviews, different experiences, that may be coming into the workplace with trauma. And these kinds of things can be very triggering. So it may be funny to you because you're not coming in with all of those experiences. So be mindful if you've got individuals in your workplace who are may not necessarily grasp the idea that not everyone is starting off at the same place in terms of life experiences. Any questions on the hostile work environment? Does this make sense to everyone? Everyone aware of this? Everybody have procedures and policies written up not only around sexual harassment, but hostile work environment in their workplaces? Okay. So type of sexual harassment, going into the physical harassment, it can be assault, impeding or blocking movement. So going back to that example I used earlier, or inappropriate touching. And this can also be, I've listed clothing here. If it's to the point where someone is commenting on someone's clothing, touching their clothes, things along those lines, that can be considered harassment. Forcing someone to kiss you, obviously we know that that is can be construed as harassment. Hugging. There was an instance a few years ago where I was obviously working in HR. There was an office party that went on, and a male coworker grabbed a female coworker and kissed her directly on the mouth. And she filed a claim of harassment, saying that the kiss was unwanted and unwelcome, and that was a big realization for the individual that I had to speak to about this, because his response was, well, it was a kind of a celebration. We were hanging out, people had a little bit to drink, so I kissed her. I didn't think that there was anything wrong with it. Again, you're not coming to the table with everyone's worldview. You don't know what someone is going to consider to be harassing or not. If you are in doubt that someone will find you kissing or hugging them offensive, my first rule of thumb is then don't do it. And in the workplace, if you feel the need to hug someone, because I know I work with huggers, I am not a hugger, but I've worked with huggers, ask permission. It's very simple to say, listen, I'm really hoping everything works out. May I give you a hug? Are you okay if I give you a hug? Ask permission before you do it, because some people are just not huggers, or they're put off by it. And again, you don't know what that person's bringing to the table. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. Nonverbal harassment. Nonverbal harassment can be looking looking at a person's body up and down, sort of leering at them, derogatory gestures or facial expressions of a sexual nature, or following a person, always happening to be where that individual is. Visual harassment can be posters, drawing, pictures, screensavers, emails, or text of a sexual nature. There was an instance where I had to coach an employee who thought it would be okay if he just sent GIFs in text messages to a female employee of a sexual nature, and said, I didn't say anything to her. I didn't, physically touch her. What's wrong with doing this? And not understanding that, A, it's a violation, B, the messages were wholly inappropriate, and C, they were unwelcome. So there's a lot wrong with it. So just because there isn't necessarily a physical conversation, words aren't being said, physical touching does not occur, it does not mean that harassment hasn't occurred. Another example I will give you, several years ago, I was presented with a situation where a female employee would come in early to work. There was an IT guy that worked there, and I don't know if all of you, I may be dating myself with the reference, but if all of you are aware of the singer Marvin Gaye, he had a song out years and years ago called Sexual Healing. Every time the female employee walked through, this IT guy played this song, to the point where it became uncomfortable beyond measure for the female employee. And she, did the right thing, told him to stop, said it made her uncomfortable. He continued to do it, and it escalated. In his mind, it was a joke. In her mind, it felt very isolating. She was scared. She felt targeted, and it required intervention. So again, that's what I mean by, a lot of people can take that initial joke. A lot of people can say, oh, you probably didn't realize what you did offended me, but now it offends me, and I appreciate if you wouldn't do it again. You will run into individuals who will continue to push boundaries a little bit, like I had to deal with in this case, that will result in formal conversations, even if you're doing all of the right things up to that point. Okay. Any questions on that? Anyone? Oh, hold on. Is that a question?
We did have two in the chat. So there's one about just recommendations on harassment prevention training videos for employees. The one currently at this organization is a little bit outdated and dull. And then go ahead.
Yeah, on training, I don't have a vendor that I necessarily work with on training videos, but I will tell you, if you just go out and Google sexual harassment training, you can find quite a few tapes, quite a few online resources that you might be able to use. I don't know costs on them. If you're familiar with Best Care EAP, you might reach out to them and see if they know of a vendor in the business that could provide, online trainer or ongoing training that you might be able to use and bring into your organization. Yeah.
And those of you who are NAM members, we do have a partnership with Best Care, so I'll drop that link in the chat. And then Ralph, the second question kind of goes into kind of first offense and how to kind of escalate things, if I'm reading correctly. So if the offender engages in the unwelcome behavior again and the victim goes to HR, does HR manager treat this as a first offense if they kind of just talk to him the first time, when it may not be, if they didn't come forward, or if they learn of the initial conversation, should this be considered the beginning of a pattern of behavior where more severe consequences may be appropriate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say it depends. And here's where I would say it depends. If the individual is coming to me and saying, listen, I told this individual that their behavior was unwelcome the first time, and the first time they asked me out, this time they actually blocked me from leaving the copy room and wouldn't let me go until I told them that I would think about going out with them. In that instance, that's going to result in more than just a conversation. That's going to result in disciplinary action, possibly termination, because you're threatening the employee at that point by blocking their ability to leave. That's an issue of physical safety. If it's a situation where an employee comes to me and says, listen, I told this guy that I'm not interested in going out with him. He seems pretty harmless, but he asked me out again today. And I'm just not sure what I can do at this point to help him get the message. In that instance, I might bring the employee in and say, listen, I want to make you aware of a situation that I've been brought into the loop on. I would go over the situation with them. I would also let the individual know if the employee does not want to go out with you, that is perfectly within their right. Continuing to go down this path could be viewed as harassing, which can lead to disciplinary action up to and including termination. The other thing that if you don't have one that I would recommend that you do, because it helps nip a lot of this in the bud, is a fraternization policy within the workplace that penalizes or tells employees that you cannot have a personal relationship with someone that you work with in the workplace. I know that some people say, well, the company is big enough, and maybe the company, if you're working at a company like Mutual of Omaha, you can say, well, if you work in a different division and not in the same building, then we don't care. Most organizations that I consult with or work with are small businesses. And so having a fraternization policy to say you can't date someone in the workplace helps to eliminate a lot of those, hey, will you go out with me situations that escalate or can escalate into harassment issues. So again, it really depends on content and context. But I think in both of those situations, both deserve a conversation. One might deserve more than a conversation, depending on the severity of it, and it may even lead to termination. Did that answer your question? Is that what you were looking for? Let me look here, Lisa.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. And then, did I miss? Oh, great point here. Someone said, well, I think there's sometimes a generational difference in the way people interact between genders. Was the individual who kissed the woman at the party older? No, they were of similar age. One thing that I will tell you, though, is I did work with somebody a few years ago who was an older gentleman who touched people, in particular females, a lot. He would come up behind females who were at their desk and put his hands on their shoulders. He would, brush their arm. He would hug them, things along those lines. And I did have to tell him, you need to keep your hands to yourself. And his comment was, well, that's just how, I was sort of brought up in business that was okay to do. And I said, Business has changed. The norms back then are not the norms now. You cannot go around just touching people and assuming that it's okay. And I had to teach him about A, just not doing it, or B, and in certain situations, asking if it was okay to do. And we eliminated the behavior. But yeah, I sometimes believe generational differences can impact that, but I treat those the same way. So if it's occurring, even if it's meant innocently, it can still put the organization at risk if it's not addressed. Great question. Anything else before we go on? Thanks for those questions. All right. Whoops. There we go. Types of sexual harassment, we've talked about this, but I think it bears repeating. If you don't have this in your policies and procedures, it might be worth putting that in there. Comments about clothing, personal behavior, sexual or sexually based jokes, sexual innuendos, or creating or perpetuating rumors. All of these things can be construed as sexual harassment. All of these things, depending on the severity, can contribute to a hostile work environment. So if you don't have these items specifically spelled out in your policies and procedure manual, I would recommend that you do so. Examples of sexual harassment. So transmitting or posting emails. So sending emails, whoops. So sending emails over your company Outlook that may be of an explicit or provocative nature. Texts or pictures of a sexual or other harassing nature. GIFs and memes, we talked about this. Displaying sexually suggestive objects, pictures, or posters, and playing sexually suggestive music. Someone asked me in one of the trainings, what would it be like if you, what does it mean to display sexually suggestive objects? The best example that I can point to is if you had a Sports Illustrated swimsuit catalog or folder catalog, and you hung the calendar up in your office, and you worked in an office full of women, and women were saying, you know what, I'm uncomfortable coming into your office. I think that calendar is demeaning, things along those lines. Those types of complaints need to be listened to, because although it may not be offensive to you, and I'm assuming in this case we're talking about a straight man, although it may not be offensive to the person who has hung the calendar, what you're really looking at is the impact it's having on the individuals that you're working with. And so just because it's not offensive to you, and just because you don't have a problem with it, doesn't mean that it's okay to display in the workplace. Okay. Does everyone have a workplace, a physical workplace policy about what you can display and show in your particular areas, what people can have on desks and things along those lines? Does everyone have one of those? If you don't, it might be worth investing in, because that can also help deter people from posting or displaying inappropriate or potentially offensive items within their workspace. All right. Here we go. So employer responsibility. Title VII actually outlines that employees or employers, excuse me, are to provide safe working conditions for employees free of harassment. This means coworkers. The employee is responsible if they knew or should have known about the harassment and did not stop it or discourage complaints. So if a coworker is harassing another coworker, and that coworker's gone to the manager, and the manager fails to do nothing about it, or to do something about it, then the employer can be held liable. The employer must have a strong policy encouraging employees to report harassment, as well as a strong policy related to sexual harassment within the workplace and hostile work environment. And the employee must be able to take advantage of the reporting process. So what do I mean by that? It's fine to have a reporting process within an organization, but if that reporting process forces me as the person who is being harassed to make a complaint, and the complaint is going to my harasser, it's probably not going to be viewed as recourse within the law. If you are looking to ensure that you have a full comprehensive reporting process within your organization, you need to make sure that the person who is being harassed has multiple avenues with which to report. So that might mean going to human resources. That might mean going to your boss's boss, if it is in fact your manager that is harassing you. If you are working in a nonprofit, it may mean that you reach out to your corporate governance person or your board chair. It may mean that if you're in a larger organization that you can report it through a tool like Ethical Advocate. The point is there cannot be just one single source or method of reporting. And the method of reporting cannot be one in which the person who's being harassed can only go to the person harassing them. There's got to be other avenues of reporting. Otherwise, what the law might say is, okay, great, you had a method of reporting, but it was to the individual who was harassing the employee. Did you really think that they would, go to the harasser and say, I want to file a complaint on you, and have it stop there? Probably not. So again, you want to make sure that you've got multiple avenues for reporting in place, especially as it relates to harassment. Okay, the impact of sexual harassment. I'm not going to read all of these, but suffice it to say that it does create a sense of victimization, decreased productivity, because if you are dealing with being harassed at work or dodging harassing comments or behavior, it's going to detract from your ability to be productive. There may be time and attendance problems. If I'm feeling harassed, the likelihood that I'm going to want to go in each and every day and deal with that is probably not great. There may be loss of employment or suspension for the harasser. So if I'm the person being harassed, but I work in a really critical role in the organization, or if I'm the harasser, I should say, but I work in a really critical role of the organization, and I'm suspended because of my behavior or put on administrative leave, I could really be putting the business at a disadvantage because my talent, despite the horrible behavior that I displayed, my talent is not being used to its fullest ability. So, the harasser not only hurts the target, but can also hurt the organization through loss of talent and through potential legal actions. Time is taken away from the job to investigate claims. So if you've ever been involved in a sexual harassment investigation, they are lengthy, they are long in terms of the amount of interviews that you will do, in terms of the amount of time that you'll spend on them, because it's not just looking at a complaint, it's looking at the complaint in the context of the organization and who might have heard things and taking statements and all of those things. And it can be quite an involved process. And then it can also create an uncomfortable work environment. And then lastly, depending on the severity of it, it can create or it can result in legal fees for the organization, possible lawsuits, and loss of goodwill. And all of these instances that I've listed here with the companies are organizations who faced potential loss of monetary wealth, as well as loss of goodwill within the business environment because of claims of sexual harassment. Any questions on this? Any comments? Make sense? Okay. So sexual harassment versus friendly behavior. A single comment, as we said before, may not be indicative of sexual harassment, but if it's a patterned behavior, it could be viewed as sexual harassment, especially if the individual being harassed has told the person, hey, stop, I don't find your behavior welcome, and the behavior from the harasser continues. The critical element is whether the behavior is perceived as unwelcomed by another person. So again, my intention may be that I'm just joking with you, but if the harasser perceives it as being, or the person being harassed perceives it as being unwelcome, that's all that matters. A reasonable person standard can also be applied. Would the alleged conduct be offensive to a reasonable person? So again, if it's a poor joke, you know, a reasonable person might say, okay, Ralph told a really stupid, inappropriate joke that needs to be addressed. I don't really view that as necessarily being harassing in nature. And a reasonable person probably wouldn't look at it as being harassing in nature. But if it's the 15th time that Ralph has told an inappropriate joke, and the person who is on the receiving end has said, I find this joke's offensive, you know, I want you to stop, and the behavior continues, that could warrant or rise to the measure of sexual harassment. Again, it's content and context in which you have to look at these situations, because they're not always black and white. Okay, really, really important. Whenever I coach someone on sexual harassment, whenever I have to have a conversation with someone who is the harasser, I always tell them intent is not relevant. Your intention, or how you wanted a joke to land, or how you intended to say something, or the hug you gave someone without permission, is not what's in question here. It's the impact. All that matters is the impact of your behavior on the other person. So regardless of the intent, the behavior will be judged on its impact upon the work environment. So if you are coaching someone who is in your office regarding harassment, and they say something to you like, well, it wasn't my intention, I just thought that he or she should, you know, they need to learn to take a joke. I would be very stern with them and saying, your intention may have been one thing, the impact of what you did is something else. And that's what I want to address today, is the impact of your behavior, not what your intention was, the impact. And have a conversation around that. It takes the or should I say, it deflates the argument from the person who has done the harassing behavior of saying, I didn't mean anything by it. Well, whether or not you did or didn't, again, goes back to what we talked about earlier. You're not coming into the work environment with all of the worldviews, the experiences, the potential trauma that other people may be walking into the environment with. So it starts with respect for everyone that we work with, and it goes from there. So again, your intention is not what we're talking about. It's the impact of what you did. Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone have comments on that? Okay. If you're not sure if the behavior you're experiencing or witnessed is sexual harassment, ask yourself, is this verbal or physical behavior of a sexual nature? Is the conduct offensive to the person who it's directed toward? Does the employee have to tolerate that type of conduct in order to keep his or her job? Is the conduct so pervasive or offensive that it interferes with the employee's job and makes his or her environment unpleasant? Again, these are sort of litmus test questions that you can go through to ask yourself, if something is being presented to you, if it is sexually harassing in nature. If something is being presented to you and you're thinking, well, gee, does this really rise to the level of sexual harassment? Keep these questions and use these as a basis for interview when you're talking to the person who may be bringing the complaint to you. Is the individual who is harassing you, are they saying verbal or are they doing things that are of a physical behavior that could be construed sexually? Yes, they are. Well, great. Let's talk about what that behavior looks like and really use these to dig deep into the content of the situation and the context in which these situations are occurring. I guarantee you by the last question, you will know if the behavior rises to a level of sexual harassment or if it is a behavior that, while may be inappropriate, can be coached to and modified. Is your behavior unwelcome? So if you are coaching someone who has been accused of harassment, these are some great pointers to leave that individual with when they're leaving the coaching session. Again, respect the people around you. Think before speaking or acting. Imagine how other people might be feeling and how your comment or your gesture or your behavior might land. Exercise common courtesy. Again, and this is where I find a lot of people wind up in trouble because they tell a joke or say something that they think is funny and it's really not. So again, think twice before making a joke. Recognize when you've stepped over a line. And if you have stepped over a line, be smart enough to know that you've done that. If another coworker comes to you and says, you know what, Ralph, you really hurt Sarah's feelings when you said that today. Be respectful enough to for the individual to go to Sarah, in this case, me, to say, I'm really sorry. I didn't intend for what I said to offend you. And I just want you to know that I apologize. That can go a long way toward de-escalating situations. It's just the acknowledgement of your behavior and apologizing for what you did. And then lastly, ensure that your organization has two things in place: a strong reporting mechanism to report misconduct, which we've talked about, and again, provide multiple reporting paths, and then a policy that forbids retaliation for claims of harassment. Organizations may not be found guilty of harassment, but organizations can be found guilty of retaliation if they are found to have taken punitive action against the accuser because they filed a harassment claim. So ensure that sexual harassment policies and procedures are specifically reference non-retaliation clauses, meaning if I'm an employee and I file a harassment claim in good faith, that I am not going to be fired for doing so or demoted or have some sort of other punitive action taken against me. Outline what retaliation may look like so that managers are aware, hey, if I engage in this behavior by moving someone who filed a harassment claim who works on first shift to graveyard, that could be construed as retaliation. I probably don't want to do that. And then define what employees should do if they feel that they are victims of retaliation. That is the end of our session on sexual harassment. Does anyone have any questions or comments before we jump into workplace bullying?
Ralph, I have a question for you.
Sure.
And I don't know that anything would be different, but would a situation be handled differently if it was an employee claiming sexual harassment, but it's not by another employee, it's a customer, for example?
I've run into that, and no. And so you are responsible to ensure the protection of your employees. So if it's a customer or if it's in the case that I had, it was a vendor. I went to that vendor's manager and said, listen, comments were not appropriate, comments were not okay. I need you to take care of this. I've worked in financial services where I've had to pull customers aside and say, listen, I've become aware of some jokes or comments that you may have made to some of, and in this case, it was always female staff. They're not appropriate. They're not okay. If you continue to make these kinds of comments, I'm going to have to ask you to go to another location, or we may have to revoke your membership from our financial institution. And so, yeah, I've done both of those things. And so once that's done, if the behavior continues, then I've reached out to legal counsel, and it's been followed up with, in one case, it was a ban and bar letter. In another case, with the vendor, it resulted in that individual being terminated. So, yeah.
What if you have an employee that says, I feel like I need to tell you this, but I don't want you to do anything about it?
Then I always say to them, if you're coming to me and telling me, and you don't want me to do anything about it, I can't guarantee that. My responsibility is to protect you and the organization. So if there is unethical or illegal behavior going on, I'm going to be compelled to do something about that. That's what I always tell them. Yep.
Thanks, Ralph.
Sure. Okay, well, we have about 16 minutes left, and I want to jump into the bullying section of our presentation and chat about this just for a few. So let's go ahead. So we're going to talk about the causes and effects of bullying, and in interest of time, not necessarily going to dive in deep to this, but as we go through the presentation, think about if you've ever witnessed a bullying in the workplace, and what bullying may have felt like, and your experience with it, or if you've ever seen someone being bullied. And then we're going to talk about, is bullying actually illegal? So this is examples of bullying behavior: yelling at someone, screaming at someone, constantly criticizing someone, inconsistent compliance with rules. So one day you're told you're doing something right, the next day you're told you're doing it wrong. Threatening job loss, insults and put downs, discounting or denying of accomplishments, or exclusions from groups. These are all examples of bullying behaviors within the workplace. And in some organizations, you may be so used to the behavior that it's just normalized to you. But if you think about what these actions can have on your psyche and your mental well-being, these are all things that can do irreparable damage to you as an employee if you're exposed to this behavior for long periods of time. So bullying versus harassment. Bullying, there is no protection against bullying in the workplace. How do you view a bullying manager against a manager who just has high expectations? Or you will hear they're difficult to work for, or yeah, they're really challenging to work for, but you'll learn a lot. But you watch this person in action, and what they do is degrade, demean, humiliate, exclude, do all of those things that we talked about. And don't be of the mindset that it only occurs, that bullying only occurs with frontline people or staff people. Bullying I've seen occur at all levels of an organization. It can happen from executive to executive. It can happen to people at the highest ranks of an organization, all the way, as I said, all the way down to frontline staff. So bullying can happen to anyone at any time. Harassment, as we've reviewed, is as the rights of a protected class are violated within the workplace. Harassment is against the law and subject to prosecution. Bullying is not. So if you're being bullied in a workplace, you have one of two choices within the environment. You can work to change the environment, or you can work to change yourself and get out of the environment. And I don't mean to paint a bleak picture of it, but unless you've got things set up within the organization to protect employees against bullying, it can creep in very subtly. So bullying defined, this is from the Workplace Bullying Institute. Workplace bullying is repeated health-harming mistreatment of one or more persons, and again, they're referred to as targets, by one or more perpetrators that takes on the form of the following: verbal abuse, conduct which is threatening, humiliating, or intimidating, work interference, work sabotage, that ultimately prevents the work from getting done, and then exploitation of a known psychological or physical vulnerability. All of these things can be termed as bullying within the workplace. 80% of the behavior that goes on from a bully within the workplace would be considered legal. You can scream at somebody in the workplace. You can not invite someone to a meeting in the workplace. You can, do any number of things in the workplace and have it be considered legal activity. Illegal activity is when it takes on the form of actually physically harming someone, where it might border on harassment or hostile work environment, which we talked about earlier. But 80% of the behavior within a workplace that is considered bullying would also be considered legal behavior. We talked about sexual harassment, so I'm not going to go back through and review the definitions of quid pro quo and hostile work environment, but I did want to include this slide to say, if bullying starts to slide over into one of the topics that we talked about related to harassment, then that's when the behavior can go from legal to illegal very quickly. So you want to monitor this. And if you are an HR manager who is dealing with somebody who has said that they're being bullied, it's really important that you ask these questions to say, how far has the bullying gone? Talk to me about what's been done so that you have a clear picture of what's going on in the organization. Bullying versus discrimination. Again, we talked earlier about discrimination falling under Title VII. Under Title VII, discrimination can be sex, race, religion, national origin. If you're looking at EEO, that can also include gender, as it does with Title VII, but also sexual orientation. The thing that you need to think of as it relates to bullying and discrimination is if disparate impact is occurring, which is overt discrimination, or adverse impact, which is an unwanted or an unanticipated result of taking a particular action. So as an example, if an African-American employee comes to me as a white male manager and says that they are being bullied or they're being made to feel as though they're being bullied. And my answer is automatically to move that African-American employee who's been great up until that point to another shift to get them out of the situation. That might be construed as being penalizing that African-American employee. So the bullying situation may now be sort of moving into a disparate impact or an adverse impact type of situation where I have moved someone, simply to resolve the issue without thinking about the impact that it could have on them. So be very, very careful if you're in a bullying situation to think, well, I'll just move one of the employees, because it's not necessarily as easy as that. The broken window theory, very quickly, this gets into a study that was done several years ago, 27 years ago, by a Stanford University psychologist named Philip Zimbardo. There were two cars in the same condition. One was parked in the street of Palo Alto, California, which is the big Silicon Valley area, and it sat untouched for a week. An identical car was parked in a comparable neighborhood in the Bronx. Only in this case, the license plate was removed from the car and the hood was propped open. What happened to the car in the Bronx was that that sign, that indicator of the hood being popped and the license plates being removed, resulted in that car being vandalized over the course of a week. Windows broken, seats taken out, basically tires removed. It was on bricks by the end of the week, all because of the indicators that the hood was up and the license plate were removed. Again, windows were smashed out, parts were taken, upholstery was ripped, all of those things. Conversely, the Palo Alto car sat untouched for more than a week. In a final twist, the scientist smashed one of the windows in the Palo Alto's and the car in Palo Alto with a sledgehammer. And within a few hours, that car too was destroyed. It was noted that the adult vandals, because they were adults in both cases, were primarily well-dressed, clean-cut, and respectable looking. The point of the experiment is that disorder invites even more disorder. So that if you have disorder in the organization and you allow it to continue, it's going to result in future, more severe actions taking place. So I often talk about incivility and bullying, and incivility leading to bullying. Incivility starts with dirty looks or snide comments or condescension, appropriating resources, taking advantage of a manager's time, hoarding knowledge, or isolating employees from projects or people. So incivility you can think of as the license plates and the hood being up in the car. It's the first sign of something's not okay here. And the more that you condone incivility in the workplace, the greater chance that you have for bullying to occur. So this is a chart that I will provide you. It's from 2013, and I just recently looked up the stats of uncivil and bullying behavior outcomes, and shows the impact that it has on employees within the workplace. 80% of people who said that they were bullied or treated poorly within the workplace talk about lost work time worrying about the incident, or spending worrying about the incident. The cost of bullying and incivility, turnover, loss of productivity, accidents and absenteeism, customer complaints, increased expenses, isolation on the part of the employee, and anxiety and depression. So it's not just somebody needing to develop a thicker skin, which I've heard managers say to employees, so they just need to develop a thicker skin. It goes beyond that, especially when it starts to impact the health and the financial and emotional well-being of people. So what can HR do? Executive leadership needs to walk the talk. No bullying, no uncivil behavior. And it has to be written into policies and procedures and spoken about. Without executive leadership support, any efforts to stop bullying and uncivil behavior will fail, because everyone, regardless of the organization, takes their cues from the top. It is not HR's role to act as the police. Unfortunately, we deal with the aftermath, but it's the executive's role in the organization to set the tone and the temperature and the cadence for what goes on within the company. It's not HR's responsibility to establish the organization's culture. Again, that needs to be set from the top. So if you don't want bullying to occur, if you want people to treat each other with respect and dignity, the executives need to ensure that that is instilled, and ensure that behaviors that are not in line with treating people with respect and dignity are extinguished. Without executive leadership support, any efforts that HR makes to change behavior will fall short, because ultimately the executives will be looked at, and if they're not willing to take action or won't take action for whatever reason, then whatever you do as an HR professional will only be a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Global suggestions, make sure that there's a vision in place for internal behaviors. Create a corporate civility plan, and it should be built into the mission and vision. Does the company have a set of core values like integrity, respect, honesty? Those things can be pointed back to if people are yelling and screaming at people. You can't say that you value respect in the organization if you allow managers to yell and scream at others. Do senior managers support the vision, mission, and values of the organization? If they don't, then why are they senior managers? And what do we need to do to help change their behavior? And then policies and codes of conduct should be enforced, meaning if you're not doing this, following the values that we have, following the procedures, following the civility plan that we have in place, that we will take action against you in the form of disciplinary action, coaching, if it's a first offense, and potentially termination. The continuum, bullying and incivility run on a continuum. So I apologize for my slide skipping there. Again, if you allow incivility, bullying is not far behind. It's just a stone's throw away because people will continue to push the envelope. Steps to creating a civil work environment, engage in productive conflict management, engage in conflict resolution, and what does that look like within the organization? Work with individuals on stress management to, train managers when you feel stressed. This is what you should do rather than yelling and screaming at people. Focus on teamwork. And support interpersonal communication. Work to have people resolve their issues rather than engaging in behaviors that could lead to potential, negative conversations, gossiping, faction building, things along those lines in the work environment. Again, leaders model civility for others. If your leaders are not modeling civility, others will not follow suit. If you are branding an organization as a respectable, family-friendly, people matter kind of environment, then then you'll want to make sure that what you have in place internally supports that. And if it doesn't, then it gives you great pause to think, are we doing what we say we're doing as an organization internally and externally? Continue to communicate your values, continue to communicate what's acceptable behavior in the organization, and hold up what you want other people to do. Show people examples of, here's the behavior that we want all employees to model. This will send out distinct and specific cues for people in the workplace. And then lastly, put it in writing. Don't just talk about it, put it in writing and refer to it often. And then lastly, recruit for behaviors, reward the right behavior, which is what I just talked about. Build civility into your performance management, something along the lines of respecting values, adhering to corporate civility plans, things along those lines. And then work to reduce stress within your environment, allowing people to know that if you're stressed, we understand, but the way in which you manage your stress is what we want to talk about, because that can come out in negative ways as you're dealing with coworkers, clients, etc. And then the continuum here, incivility leads to bullying, which ultimately leads to corporate decline if you tolerate the behaviors. And then lastly, I've put a list of references here that you can look at your leisure, that will go over all the things that we talked about today, and they're all the sources that I used for our presentation. So